I got to start where all conversations about the Flyers begin and end, apparently, Charlie. Morgan Frost. We've been doing this for so long.
Yeah, it
with
never
Morgan
ends.
Frost.
The Morgan Frost conversation
we always say,
never
like, one of
ends.
the biggest nights of our careers was that 2017 draft.
Mm-hmm. Was it? I mean, it was a cool party.
We thought it was
a
the
cool
launching
party.
We thought
I
it was
had a good time.
Listen, we had Keith Jones on the show. We were there with WIP. We thought it was a real launching pad for us and the Flyers. And then, of course, things went the ways they went for both us and the Flyers. And here we are. But they drafted Morgan Frost on that night so long ago. And it feels like we've been having this conversation about him ever since.
At least since like 2000.
Yeah, well,
like
for the
2020,
last,
I would
for
say.
the last 3-4 years.
Yeah,
probably.
2020, 2021 is when the Morgan Frost debate really kicked off.
So he's been scratched in 4 of the last 5, and today shows up in 32 Thoughts. Elliotte Friedman, his written article, The 32 Thoughts, says, player team that seem a match, Morgan Frost and Chicago. Frost didn't play Wednesday against Carolina, the 4th game of the last 5 he's watched from the press box. He's not a complainer, prefers to keep any displeasure behind closed doors, but players want to play. Obviously, any dance needs partners who deal, but the Blackhawks, in dire need of centers, are the one team that makes sense for him. I, in the outline, highlighted and underlined, but the Blackhawks in dire need of centers, because that cracks me up. You know who else is in dire need of centers?
The Flyers sure are.
The team he currently plays for. But I get it. Like, for whatever reason, he and John Tortorella, and like, listen, again, this season especially, I'm up to here with it. I don't care anymore. But for the good of finding out who some of these wingers are, they need a center, at least one who drives some offense. And Frost, when he's playing well, which he hasn't to this point, that's what he does. Yeah, sure, trade him to Chicago. You know what? They're in town tomorrow. Have your conversation then. But, like, right now, he's got to be in the lineup because there's no one else.
Yeah, I want to talk about this report, which isn't even really a report
It's
from
amusing.
Elliotte. It's amusing, but Elliotte is a pro, and he does
space musing.
He doesn't
not
make
amusing.
musings just because they popped in his head one day, and especially he doesn't make musings just because they popped in his head one day and then put it as the number 4 thought. It's pretty far up the list.
Yeah.
Now, here's kind of where I'm at in terms of parsing where this comes from. I don't think it's coming from the Flyers. Reason being, everything I've heard from the Flyers is that they're not itching to trade Morgan Frost. That's not something that, like, look, if somebody calls them up and bowls them over, they'll trade him. But just because John Tortorella is scratching Morgan Frost right now, that does not mean that the Flyers are actively shopping Morgan Frost. I'm kind of backed up on that by the fact that I believe it was 2 days ago, Kevin Kurz of The Athletic wrote an article basically saying, like, the time has come for these two sides to kind of probably part ways. Then later that day, Kevin Kurz tweeted something out basically saying, like, that article that I wrote wasn't saying that the Flyers are interested in trading. I'm like, I would think if anything, it was going to come from the player. Knowing, and to be clear, I have not talked to Kevin about this at all. Knowing the way teams work, the first thing that popped in my head when I read that tweet was someone from the team DM'd him and was like, yo, dude, why are you saying that we're going to trade Morgan Frost? We're not going to trade Morgan Frost. That's bad information if you got it from somewhere. And then he puts out on Twitter the, like, I'm not saying it's from the team, to make it clear that, like, the team maybe reached out to me and said, we're not trying to trade it. So I don't think it's coming from the team. I do wonder if it's coming from Frost. Not from maybe from Frost specifically, but maybe from his agent. Basically wanting to put it out there that, like, look, Morgan, and the way it's worded about, you know, Morgan's a guy who doesn't complain. You know,
this is very much from an agent.
He puts everything behind closed doors. He's being the good soldier, but, you know,
you see what's going on.
You see what's going on here, and hey, you know, maybe I've had a conversation with Chicago's front office and they might be interested. Poke, Danny. Maybe pick up the phone and call them and see if there could be a fit. Just knowing the way this stuff works, I don't think this is leaked from the Flyers, and I don't think this is Elliotte just making stuff up.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, this may have been a soft push from the Frost camp to be like, our guys tried to be real nice about this, but he's kind of getting fed up.
And like, if I'm Frost's agent, I have to be doing this again. Like, yes, restricted, but he is in a contract year. He cannot get paid a substantial raise or anything at all if he does not play.
Yeah.
He needs to be on the ice in order to produce, in order to get a big raise.
This is very true.
And the agent wants his percentage of that raise. Like, it all just makes too much sense.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, man, he's not a complainer. And we've seen it. Like, he's not a guy.
He's been very professional and mature about all of this in terms of not rocking the boat.
And good for him. But there is going to be like an inflection point at some time, whether it's now, whether it's the trade deadline, whether it's RFA negotiations this summer, where it's like, what is this? I said this, I think, on the mailbag I did last week. At some point, this is like the relationship conversation. Where is this going? What are we?
Yeah.
Where do you see us in a year?
It's a fair
5
point.
years, 10 years?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
at some point, we have to have this conversation.
Agreed.
It's not just going to be, sign bridge deals until you're 32, and we're going to scratch you a third of the season for your entire career. He's not going to go for that. He's going to want some stability at some point on and off the ice. They have to figure something out.
And I believe Anthony DeMarco, I think he wrote an article yesterday or the day before, basically pointing out that, look, the Flyers aren't looking to trade Morgan Frost, but the next deal is probably going to be another bridge deal.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure Morgan Frost would rather the next deal not be another bridge deal.
He's, let's see, he'll turn 26 in May. Yeah, he doesn't want a 2-year contract. Yeah. Like, that's not what dudes are looking for at this time.
Exactly.
Now, because of his lack of production and maybe lack of consistent ice time, he'll want this one to be shorter so he can go out and have a prove-it situation. But he will want, I would assume, a situation in which he believes he can fairly be given the opportunity to prove it.
And to be clear, this is an important part of this one, because I do think that John Tortorella was right to make a distinction between the treatment that he gave to Morgan Frost the previous 2 years and the treatment he gave to them this year. Those previous 2 years, you could make a strong case in both of those years that Morgan Frost did not deserve to be scratched, or at least did not deserve to be the first button that Tortorella pushed in terms of scratching a guy. And it was because Torts, number one, just wasn't sold on the kid, and number two, I think wanted to push his buttons, wanted to try to get that rise out of him that he ultimately got out of him in January. That was part of it. This time, however, it's really hard to make the case that he didn't deserve to be scratched. He was playing really, really bad. Like, if you want to make the argument like, oh, well, maybe Noah Cates is playing worse, or maybe Tyson Forrest is playing worse, fair,
sure.
Like, we can have those cases, but Morgan Frost was playing poorly enough to warrant a scratch.
He was in the conversation.
He was very much in the fair conversation, looking at the numbers, looking at the eye test, looking at everything. So I'm not going to look at this situation and say that this is a controversy that John Tortorella has manufactured.
Oh, no.
Maybe the previous 2 years you could say that. This time it's kind of on Frost. However, if you're Morgan Frost, maybe you're just exhausted by it all.
I would assume, and that's the previous 2 years, this is the sort of, as sometimes it's called, the mental warfare, but it's Torts trying to bring something out of Frost to get him to another level.
Yes.
This is, dude, you suck right now.
Yeah.
I can dress 12 forwards as 6 defensemen. You're not one of those 12 forwards. And again, sure, sit Cates. They did that to start the season. It was Luchenko over Cates. He was the odd man out to start the year. Like, they were doing that. And you want to keep sitting Cates? Sure, why not? He hasn't been very good either.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is merit based.
Yeah,
this is straight up your play. This isn't me trying to get more out of you for the future. This is now. You're not very good.
Yeah, and even we've been talking about it for the last week when we talked about Morgan Frost being scratched. When we mentioned about, well, they got to get him back in the lineup at some point. It's all about like what Morgan Frost could be. It's that, you got to get him back in because Michkov needs a center that can score, and Morgan Frost is the one guy
hypothetically
who plausibly can score. Now, he hasn't this year, but he can. We've seen it. We're not talking about like you need to get Morgan Frost back in the lineup because he deserves to be back in the lineup.
Nah.
It's all about, well, he can theoretically play better because we know he has in the past. There's no part of me that thinks the scratching is unfair. Let me put it that way.
No, there was an argument in the past where it's like, is he being treated fairly? Now it's, I don't see another option. Like he has to play because look at what we're doing at center. That said, with this, let's run with the idea of maybe, let's call it Chicago, a potential trade. Chicago, one, what kind of value could Frost possibly have? Like this dire need of centers thing for Chicago, okay, but the Flyers are a team in dire need of centers, and they're choosing not to play this guy.
Yeah.
What kind of value could he possibly have?
I think he has value. I do. And based on people I've talked to, over the summer, during the early portion of the year on road trips, there were teams that would have been interested in him last offseason. The Flyers basically said, we're not really interested in trading him. And they're like, okay, I guess we need to make other plans. But I would think that if there was interest in him during the summer, during the offseason, it's not like those teams are going to be like, well, he stunk for 16 games, so we don't like him anymore. There's still going to be teams that believe that, maybe the relationship with Tortorella has run its course. Maybe it's just not a fit there. But we think Morgan Frost isn't an amazing player. I don't think there's anybody trading for him that thinks he's going to miraculously turn into a 90-point guy with him on their team. But they think he's a quality NHL center who can be in your middle six. And if teams have weakness down the middle, as a team like Chicago does, maybe there's a fit. And I just, bringing it back to the original point I made, I just get the sense that Elliotte Friedman tidbit in the 32 Thoughts was Morgan Frost camp maybe putting a little bit of a nudge onto the Flyers to be like, look, if you're not going to play him, we've unearthed a couple teams that might have some interest. Maybe pick up the phone. Flyers don't have much interest in trading him. And his agent's sitting there like, well, why not? Well, why exactly? Why not?
You don't have much interest in playing him.
Exactly.
What purpose is he serving you?
Yeah.
We think he looks real good in a suit. We like him up there. He's good for morale and the press like that. These aren't things that teams hold on to guys for.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the Morgan Frost saga. And if you're tired of hearing about Morgan Frost.
Well, you're tired of talking about him.
Just think how tired I am of talking about this guy.
We all silly like the mayor.